Level 1. Observed. You didn't look for a way into this world, didn't ask questions, and never tried to get close to those who live by different rules. But one day, circumstances align in such a way that you find yourself at the intersection of interests you didn't even know existed. At first, it feels like coincidence. You happen to be there at a moment when others would rather walk away, and you take an action that doesn't look heroic, but goes beyond normal behavior. And that is what gets noticed, not by you, and not immediately, but enough for someone to take interest. Time passes, and you think it's over, that no one paid attention. But then a man appears who doesn't introduce himself, doesn't explain the purpose of the conversation, and doesn't ask unnecessary questions. "You're not afraid," he says, studying not your words, but the pauses between them. It's not a question, it's a conclusion. You don't answer, because you understand any words here are unnecessary, and silence says more than any explanation. They give you a simple task, formulated dryly and without detail, as if the result itself doesn't matter. Deliver, retrieve, do not interfere. You complete it without improvisation, without trying to take initiative, without the desire to understand what stands behind it. And that becomes the key. What matters is not what you did, it's how you did it. You don't ask questions, don't show curiosity, and don't try to connect events. And by doing so, you prove that you can stay within boundaries. You're not accepted, you're evaluated.
Level 2. Candidate. Now you are inside the structure, but remain on its periphery, where you are not considered part of the system, but rather a resource that can be used and replaced if necessary. You are given work that requires no skill, but demands endurance, discipline, and the ability not to ask questions. Even when the situation calls for it, you clean up the consequences of other people's decisions, remove traces of actions you weren't part of, and resolve problems that existed before you arrived. You are not introduced, you are not discussed. You simply appear where needed and disappear when the task is done. Gradually, you begin to see a structure that is never explained in words, but becomes clear through behavior, reactions, and unspoken boundaries. Those above you don't give direct instructions. Those below don't discuss anything. Everyone operates within limits that were defined long ago, and you are at the very bottom of that system. You are tested for your ability to endure pressure, to maintain control when provoked, and to obey even when logic suggests otherwise. Sometimes it feels like humiliation, sometimes like a game, but in reality, it's a tool. You don't react, not because you can't, but because you understand. Reaction is a weakness that gets recorded. You stay not because you have nothing to lose, but because you begin to accept the rules.
Level 3. Accepted. The transition doesn't come with loud words or dramatic gestures, but it is recognized within the system, and after it, your position changes. The ceremony is short, restrained, almost formal, yet its meaning outweighs everything that came before. You are no longer an external element. You are part of it. You are given a name that exists only within this structure, and from that moment on, you stop being just an executor of tasks and become a bearer of responsibility. Now every action is tied not only to the result, but to the reputation forming around you. Your tasks become more complex, requiring not just execution, but understanding of context, even if it's never spoken aloud. You interact with people not as a middleman, but as a representative, and every word you say carries consequences. You learn to speak without revealing too much, to remain silent in a way that signals confidence, not weakness, to influence without raising your voice or showing force directly. You become visible to those inside the system, while remaining invisible to the outside world. And that balance must be maintained. Now mistakes don't disappear. They are recorded, and the cost becomes higher.
Level 4, Enforcer. At this level, you stop being part of the chain and become the point where decisions are made and actions are carried out without intermediaries. You are trusted with tasks where the result matters more than the process, and where there is no room for doubt or correction. You operate directly, without protection, without buffers, and every step depends solely on your judgment. You resolve conflicts that are not supposed to exist. You settle debts that are never officially recorded. You eliminate problems that are never discussed. Sometimes that means interfering in people's lives at a level where consequences cannot be undone. You don't act impulsively. You observe, analyze, wait. Every action must look like a natural outcome, not an intervention. And that is where the difficulty lies. You become less visible, more precise, more dangerous. You realize that fear can be used, but it's unstable. Respect, however, is a resource that lasts longer, and you begin to accumulate it. Level 5, Handler. Now your role changes, and you move from executing tasks to managing processes that involve other people, their decisions, and their mistakes. You have your own people now, and you are responsible for them, not just formally, but in reality, because their actions reflect on you. You decide who to trust with a task, evaluating not only skills, but psychological stability, predictability, and personal limits. You assign roles, build processes, and control results, even when you're not directly involved. Sometimes, you have to make decisions that affect the fate of people within the system, and those decisions are not always obvious. You build connections with the outside world, with business, with authority figures, with those who officially should not be connected to this structure, yet depend on it. You begin to understand that influence is more effective than force, because it doesn't need to be displayed. You solve problems before they become visible, and that is what makes you valuable.
Level 6, Advisor. You are no longer on the front line and no longer participate in operations directly, but your role becomes critically important because you shape the direction in which the system moves. You work alongside those who make decisions, but you don't impose your position. You guide it, using years of accumulated experience. People listen to you, not because you speak louder, but because you understand consequences. You analyze flows of information, movement of money, behavior patterns, and risks that are not visible on the surface, but become clear under close observation. You connect the interests of different sides, creating a balance that allows the system to function without disruption. Sometimes that balance is unstable, sometimes temporary, but it is enough. You understand that a single mistake can destroy everything built over years, so your task is to prevent it, or make sure it goes unnoticed. You operate on a level where actions remain hidden, but their consequences reshape reality.
Level 7, the Shadow. Over time, you step away from active involvement, formally leaving the system, but in practice, remaining part of it on another level. You are no longer seen. No one talks about you, but your influence remains in decisions made, even without your presence. You live a normal life that appears calm and predictable, but internal mechanisms never stop working. You automatically assess environments,
notice details, calculate outcomes, and analyze risks, even when there is no need. Sometimes you are called, rarely. But when it happens, it means the situation requires experience that cannot be replaced. You don't return, because you never fully left. And that becomes your normal state. Final. There are no rewards in this system, no recognition, no story you can tell without breaking the rules it operates by. There is only memory and understanding shared by those who walked the same path. You don't see yourself as a hero or a villain. You see yourself as part of a mechanism that activates when there are no other options and operates until the task is complete. Sometimes you look back, not to regret, but to understand how you got here. And you come to one conclusion. It wasn't a choice. It was a process. One that began once and never truly ends. Because even in silence, you remain part of the system, waiting.